Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is part 1 of our story. If you like this what if story and want to see part 2, let me know in the comments below. Before we start, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. Also, check the description for more great content and my playlist. This story was posted by BakuDekuSIMPlicityTe on Wattpad. Now let's start. The wind blew as it was a cold night. There was nothing but silence, nothing but trees. Running felt never-ending. Each time you'd let out a breath, mist came out of your mouth which showed you how cold it was. 12 It was halfway through September, just about to turn October, meaning Christmas was near, so of course it was bound to snow this year. The Omega stopped in his tracks as he was panting for air. He glanced up into the sky and his eyes were filled with water. The midnight was so pretty, filled with stars and possible constellations. Suddenly hearing the faint sounds of men and search dogs, the Omega instantly began running. There really was no end. He just hoped to escape. 1. 2 Walking down the stairs to the smell of bacon filled the air, the house warm. Katsuki Bakugo was an alpha, blonde hair and anger issues with an explosive personality. It wasn't good. He was fit as an alpha should be, and of course he's upper class. His mother Mitsuki Bakugo was also an alpha too, and so was his father, so he was a purely bred alpha. He sat at the round dining table as he yawned and took his phone out to see bunches of texts from many female Omegas he had in his school. He went to 𝗧𝗑𝗧𝗏, known as the most prestigious school you could go to, only rich people could afford, and of course Katsuki was one of them. His mother placed his breakfast down. "Enjoy," she said. Katsuki didn't bother replying as he took his fork into his hands and began eating. In all honesty, he wasn't into dating. He knew the girls were there and he had many options, but he just didn't want to. They were all for him because he was an alpha and could satisfy their needs, which explained why he didn't really seem to care about another's feelings. 3 Masaru, the father, was at work currently. He'd leave at around 6 and return back home at 8. He worked hard to provide for them. Even though he didn't need to, he still did, just so he could give Katsuki money so he could always buy whatever he wanted. 14 Katsuki ate as he took his plate, putting it in the sink. Flirting once again with those females. Mitsuki says as she stands by the sink. Is all he replied with as he left the kitchen and went up to his room. 6. 5 Mitsuki was sat on the comfy couch that she sunk into, the pillows being incredibly plush and fluffy. She had the TV news on as she loved watching what was happening on the daily basis just for Katsuki's safety. So the news of today is a missing report of an Omega. This Omega has been known from running away and now gone missing, called Izuku Midoriya, a teenage male around his 16s with green eyes, forest green hair and freckles all over. If you ever find him, there's a number tag to contact the parent, it seems, the news reporter says. Mitsuki without realization stares at the screen for a long period of time. Soon she flinches to the door slamming and the sound of footsteps. "Oh, I'm just waiting for the day that door breaks." Mitsuki speaks, her tone letting out an annoyed voice as she sighs. "Shut up, hag," the blonde says as he grabs his coat. 3. Good idea. Going to be freezing today, she speaks as the blonde places his bag down and puts his coat on. "Oh, an Omega escaped apparently," she speaks, hoping to get some reaction from her son. "No kidding," he says as he grabs his bag, swinging it onto his back. "Well then take good care," she says. It sounds more of a question, but he nods in reply and leaves. 1 The cold wind brushes past him in swift motion. As usual, it was cold to the point some fog came out of your mouth. 1 The blonde wondered why the old hag had mentioned an Omega. He wasn't interested in any of it, so she could possibly be doing it on purpose. But then again, she did love talking to him about random SHT, and that meant the news. He put his earphones in his ear and played some music as he walked his way to school. It was going to be a long day, he already knew. 16. 2 The streets were packed. People walked through. Just where was he? He didn't know anything. He trembled on his knees as he frantically looked around. It felt as if he were invisible. No one paid attention to him, and they shoved and pushed past him. Time couldn't be told, but it was around almost afternoon. The Omega clenched his shirt as he looks down and closes his eyes. He was overwhelmed. The pheromones of alphas and Omegas, he could smell them all so perfectly clear. It was scary. Suddenly, he felt a hand on his shoulder as his eyes widened as he turned around, and there was a woman. blonde standing with her eyes widened but her expression softened as she smiled warmly. The Omega ate as they stood away from the crowd. He had been given a sandwich with something added inside. He didn't see it open so he knew it was safe and it smelt delicious and fresh. "You're the Omega that ran away," the blonde woman spoke. The Omega stopped eating and slowly chewed on his food as he was sat on the floor against the wall. He glared at her as her expression slowly turned worried. "Oh, don't worry, I saw you on the news but I won't report you," she said, hoping to not get on his bad side. Izuku Midoriya was an Omega. He was incredibly malnourished and had bags under his eyes, followed on by his scruffy hair and clothes that were way too big on him. "I'm Mitsuki Bakugo," she exclaims happily as she kneels down smiling. Izuku continued eating the sandwich that he was gifted as he swallowed his last piece. Mitsuki slid over a water bottle that was also unopened so he knew it was safe. He took a sip. "7, Izuku," he stuttered quietly. He wasn't very social and definitely wasn't good with people, but she looked nice and looked as if she didn't mean harm. However, that doesn't mean he should trust her. "2, I know you won't trust me instantly but I assure you I mean no harm, and I'd like to give you shelter," she said as she smiled. Izuku thought for a moment, keeping his eye on her so she wouldn't do anything. Nodding slowly, he stood up as they both slowly walked. 8, 6, 6. "Here you can use anything, these are all unopened as I know you won't trust me yet, but please take a bath and here these are my son's clothes, he won't mind I hope," she speaks, leaving some clothes on the toilet seat followed on by a towel. 22 He was left alone as he locked the door, and took the clothes he had been acquired with as he sniffed them and could smell the pheromones of an alpha, his nose scrunched as he placed it back in its place. He felt the water temperature as the bath filled the empty spaces of the tub. Undressing, he slowly got in as the water made him hiss of pain as he got in incredibly slowly due to his scars. He sat as he looked around. The tub was modern and the house was neat, but he wanted to know where he was going to sleep now. There was no way he would be sheltered too long. For using the soft part of the bath sponge, he had a green one which was also brand new. The soap expanded as it formed more and more. The water drained as it was dirty and Izuku nonetheless embarrassed but felt so fresh. He had put on the clothes he had been given and of course it was much too large on him. For 22. 2, yeah, whatever, shitty hair. The alpha growled, annoyed as him and his red-haired male friends split up and went separate ways. He sighed as he took out his phone and earphone and once again listened to music. He was pretty close. Inserting his key into the door, he opened it as he saw the old hag and someone else, to only realize that whoever it was they were wearing his clothes. 6. F is that? He exclaimed, growling as he glared at the small, bony male. "Don't talk like that, that's the Omega that escaped," she said as she glared back at Katsuki and went in his way so he wouldn't be glaring at the Omega. "And what?" he simply said, now confused. Mitsuki plainly sighed as she patted the space beside her. Come, she demanded. The blonde alpha walked over, placing his bag down, loosening his tie as his arms rested on the back of the couch. "I had found him just as it was 11:34 a.m., she explained. She lifted her hand up, stopping the alpha from speaking over her as she continued. "I decided to shelter him for now on," she admitted as she smiled. 5. "Ts, aren't we meant to call the number telling them we found him? We get money for this, you hag." The alpha harshly spoke as Mitsuki frowned and growled. "Katsuki, we have enough money as it is. Do you see how horrible he looks? It's clear he doesn't get treated well from where he came from," she spoke as she looked at the Omega, seeing him worried and hugging his clothes, his legs tucked to his chest. "Ts, so what? I don't care, I'm gonna report him," the alpha says as he stands up, but the blonde woman catches his arm. "Katsuki, you're meant to listen to me. Do not report him," she said as she held a firm grip on her son's wrist. "Why the F not? One that's an Omega, we're sheltering it for free and it can't do anything in return," he spoke. His words hit Izuku like a brick. 33 Mitsuki frowned. This time she was furious with how he spoke. She let go of his wrist as she had raised her hand and it had loudly connected with the blonde's face. Silence followed on. 22 Tao. Dare. She growled. The alpha turned his head towards her as he also glared enraged, but surprisingly he didn't do anything except let out a TSK. "Go to your room," Mitsuki said as she crossed her arms. For the alpha stood silent as he slowly turned and he disappeared. The alpha slammed his door as he dropped his bag. What the? He cut his sentence off and took off his tie, completely followed on by his blazer, and changed into his basketball shorts, followed on by a black baggy t-shirt. He left his room after just cooling himself down. He walked into the storage closet they had and he took his basketball out. "Oi hag, I'm going to the park," he said as he held the basketball in his hand and closed the door. 2. "Okay, take care, you didn't eat lunch," she replied back as she paused the TV. "I'll eat it later," he said, walking over to the front house to the exit as he slipped his shoes on. A fragile voice interrupted. Katsuki turned to see the greenette once again. He felt like getting mad, but he held it in. "What do you want?" he said in a gentle tone. "Connie, come to," he said, afraid as he looked away. "Sure, whatever," is all Katsuki said as he stood up, taking his keys that rested on a necklace and placed it around his neck. 1-6-4-61 As Izuku sat on the floor that seemed to have a foamy feeling, he sat on the side as he watched the blonde bounce the ball from one hand to another. It looked so interesting. He had around 6 bottles sat next to him as he took care of them. It was quiet, chilly, and sometimes the wind blew colder than ever, but it was okay. As Katsuki dunked the ball into the hoop, he dropped down, bending his knees as he panted. It felt so long, but Izuku was too busy analyzing him and his movements he hadn't noticed the blonde standing in front of him. Finally, "Pass me a bottle," he panted as Izuku nodded and reached for a bottle, handing it to him. The blonde collapsed beside him as he opened the bottle and gulped it down as he panted after and rested his elbows on his knees and his back on the fence. 2. It was an awkward silence until the blonde spoke. "Know your family?" he asked as he looked at Izuku. Izuku looked at him and looked away as he looked at the floor. "No. They are dead though," he admitted. "Oh." With that, awkward silence followed on. 16. "Teacher's so annoying," the blonde said as he stood up, taking the basketball into his hand and begins running again and dunking into the hoop. Of course Izuku wasn't wanted. Why did he suggest to even come to the park as well? It was clear the blonde didn't want him there or in his house. 7. "Do you mind if I go on the swing?" Izuku asked as the blonde looked at him. "The F are you asking? Go, I don't give a," is all the blonde says as he continued running with the ball and ignored whatever the greenette said. He couldn't care less. 9. 6. Izuku was sat on the swing. It's been so long since he'd been in the park and felt the breeze and seen the sun slowly set. Izuku had his eyes closed as he swung peacefully and he felt like a kid again. "For Omega," a voice said. Izuku opened his eyes to be met by a group of males and he slowly panicked and got nervous. 27. 5. Katsuki sighed as he panted, drinking his water. He knew he had to get used to now the Omega that was going to be sheltered, but the thing was, he had never had an Omega close to him or in his house, so of course it would be weird and the old hag would 100% tell him to watch over him. He wasn't ready. He sighed and decided to see what the Omega was up to and saw around 5 males surrounding the swings and the Omega. He sighed as he got up. "Oh, for F's sakes," he muttered under his breath. Sprinting he got there in a matter of seconds. "Oi, he's with me," Katsuki said as the alphas turned. They were all alphas and they all used their pheromones to trap Izuku and make him feel overwhelmed with their scents. "I thought he was lying," one of them says. "He's mine," another alpha says as they walked towards Izuku, and Izuku stood up out of panic, stumbling over as the alpha grabbed Izuku. The Omega was weak to his knees and no longer had control over his body. 10. "Hand him over, I don't want to cause trouble," the alpha simply says as he glares at the alpha opposite him. 1. The alpha disobeyed as he held Izuku and smirked. "He's mine, unfortunately," the alpha says. 1. Katsuki sighs. "Come Omega." Katsuki uses his alpha voice as Izuku trembles to his knees as he slowly obeyed Katsuki. Katsuki himself approached Izuku to get a quicker hold of Izuku, and as he did Izuku fell against him as the alpha lifted him. "Sorry," is all the blonde says as soon the Omega passes out. 14. The male that had just held Izuku was mad, but he didn't bother as he had sensed Katsuki was indeed stronger than him. 11. Izuku's eyes opened as he was met with darkness. He moved, feeling a soft surface against his back, and he sat up slowly. "Tigh finally awake," the blonde said as he was sat at the edge of the bed. I'm sorry. Izuku exclaimed. Katsuki rolled his eyes. Doesn't matter, eat, the alpha says as he urges a bowl towards Izuku. However, Izuku couldn't trust him. What if he had put something inside it? He shook his head. I didn't poison it, my mum made it. Of course he lied. He made it as his mum was asleep, but he hoped it worked, but to his disappointment it failed. 4. Fine, will seeing me eat it make you trust me more? The alpha asked. Izuku only nodded his head. Katsuki took the spoon as he blew on it and took the spoon into his mouth, swallowing it as confirmation. It's medicine, it'll help your wounds and calm you down from the overtake of so much pheromones. Katsuki spoke as he pushed the bowl towards Izuku. Trustingly, Izuku took it and he knew it was safe and began eating. Soon enough the gnat finished the soup. Tasted really good and the flavor was all there. Katsuki took the bowl down to the kitchen. 3. Izuku didn't speak much. It's as if he were mute, not like Katsuki minded since he didn't really want to talk to the dumb Omega. 18. The Omega was now in his care, and he was unsure of why it had to be in his care. But he loved it. This Omega would now be his pet. As that is what he thought. 16. He returned back to the room as he sat on his desk. He hadn't felt bad one bit for the Omega, well maybe a little, but just how bad could his life be? Okay, maybe it was bad in this world. Omega were seen as SEC toys for men, especially alphas that were desperate, and all the Omega would have to do is stay with that alpha, give them a child and take care of it. Male or female Omegas both were seen the same, except most alphas craved for a male Omega. 15. It was hard for an Omega to get a job considering they had a 𝗧𝗵𝗃 that effed them over, so it would be difficult for them to work. However, their pheromones could bring in more alpha to work, which was an advantage in a way. Jobs for an Omega didn't really exist, as they were of course seen inferior than alphas and even betas. Most Omegas were hiding though. They had lied about their secondary gender to get into work, but before they knew it they were kicked out. And of course high rates of RPE were mostly Omegas, as they were what an alpha wanted, and most alphas would make dumb excuses saying they wanted it. They used their pheromones on me, they asked for it, etc. When in reality all alphas were just desperate for Sector 13. Izuku saw alphas as rapists. In his eyes they were disgusting, sinful, intimidating, and he had wished they were all wiped out from the earth. 14. Izuku shook his head, breaking from his trance as he saw the blonde walk over and got into bed comfortably. I'ma go sleep, the blonde said as Izuku nodded his head. He couldn't help but think the worst. What if this alpha right beside him had wanted to take advantage of him? Had wanted to do unimaginable things with him, and he was just waiting for the right chance, yet he wasn't going to sleep. 7. The blonde thrusted inside the gnat. Izuku knew it. He knew the blonde had no good intentions, yet he still fell for it, cried as he felt pain. He wanted to give up. 22. Izuku's eyes shot open incredibly fast as his breathing was heavy. He stared beside him to see the blonde peacefully sleeping, and finally Izuku breathed calmly. Hey, you guys thought? Did I get you on that one? 61. Steadily Izuku got out of bed as tears had rolled down his eyes. What a nightmare, he thought. He walked to the bathroom that was located inside the room and locked it as he sat on the cold floor with the lights off, and he tucked his knees into his chest. For he slowed his breathing and stopped the tears rolling down his face. His face became warm. He couldn't believe he fell asleep and his dream was horrible. What if it ended up really happening? More tears rolled down his face. He was so lonely. He had only now realized he'd had no one. 5. To date, Saturday 25 September 20XX time, 6:40 a.m. 20. Katsuki yawned as he heard silence. It was so nice and warm under the covers he didn't feel like getting up, however he knew he had to. He had to work out and lift weights as he just had his day off yesterday and the day before that he had lifted. Sitting up he stretched his muscles, feeling them click and hearing them pop. It felt so good, however he had noticed his bed was empty. And the Omega wasn't there anymore. 3. Despite that he couldn't care less, he got up as he walked to his wardrobe, taking out a black tank top with some shorts as he went to the bathroom. However, it was locked. So the Omega was in there. Oi, how long? Katsuki asked, but no reply. Oh, what could be taking that DMN Omega so long, Katsuki thought. Finally he decided to get his key for the bathroom, and he did. He walked over, unlocking it, and he saw the Omega lying dead on the floor. Was he dead? The blonde thought. 3. He approached the Omega and kneeled down checking his pulse to see he had still had it, but as he touched the Omega body it was freezing cold. 8. Just how long were you in here? He spoke out loud. He placed his arms under the body, lifting him up and only now realizing how light he felt as he weighed at least 20 pounds, and he slightly looked like it too, just skin and bone. 8. Katsuki placed him under the covers. Izuku was bound to be sick. His immune system was probably weak as hell, and so were his bones. And Katsuki felt bad, but he shook his head. 2. He couldn't just leave the Omega unsupervised. He knew he had to stay and so decided to take a day off just for this Omega because of his stupidity of lying and sleeping on the cold bathroom floor. 1. Did he not like the bed? Why did he sleep in the bathroom? How come I didn't feel anything? Maybe he's just that light. Awakening, Izuku's eyes fluttered open as he felt a soft surface and he felt warm instead of cold. Sitting up he realized he was on the bed again. Was that a dream? The door opened as it revealed a blonde holding a plate of pancakes that the odor reached to Izuku's nose. It smelt fresh and incredibly good. Oh, you're awake, the blonde said. He sighed as he got out a table and placed it on the bed, putting the plate of pancakes down onto it. It's pancakes made with bananas, also cut some strawberries, placed some blueberries and some bananas for you so it can fill you up. Eat as much as you can, the blonde spoke. It's as if he were presenting it to a food critic. 11. Izuku picked up the fork and the knife, which he hesitantly picked up as he had bad memories with it, and cut into the pancakes, seeing the steam escape from it. 2. Glancing at the blonde, he was eating a bowl of cut-up fruits just like Izuku, and he smiled. Hasn't smiled for a while. 2. Taking a fork full of pancakes and fruits, he put it in his mouth only to have various amounts of flavors explore his mouth. It all tasted incredibly good, and to think about it, he was quite hungry when he woke up. 7. Thank you, Izuku said as the blonde glanced over. He didn't respond but only nodded before hooking his attention back to the TV. 9. Soon enough Izuku only left a little. He ate the fruits though, since the blueberries were sour and the strawberries were sour too, with a sugary coat on it which balanced it out. 1. Katsuki walked over. Done? He asked as he gained a light nod from the Omega. Sorry, I didn't finish, Izuku apologized. The blonde wanted to smile, however he held it in. He grabbed the fork as he took the last piece of pancake into his mouth. It's cool, you ate? The blonde spoke before taking the plate and leaving the room. Izuku was left alone as he was sat on the bed. The taste of the pancakes and the fruits still lingered in his mouth. He's never had breakfast this good. He was usually given bread, some mashed potatoes and some chicken, none of it seasoned. His stomach didn't digest it well, but it was still food he could handle. 35. He glanced around. The room was tidy and it smelt nice. He stood out of bed, however he crumbled to the floor for some unknown reason. Nothing hurt him but his knees gave out. The Alpha entered, seeing the Omega on the floor, and he rushed over helping him up. Thanks, Izuku stuttered. The blonde didn't reply, he just sighed as he walked over to his desk, taking a seat. 3. I have a question, the Alpha spoke as Izuku glanced confused. Just what could it be? He didn't have a bad feeling, but it wasn't really good. Why were you in the bathroom? Out, the blonde asked as he looked at Izuku to see his reaction. Meanwhile, Izuku's eyes widened. Couldn't possibly tell him he had a dream about the blonde raping him. His lips quivered. I had a bad dream, Izuku spoke as he didn't look up and only played with the hem of his shirt. Which was? The blonde asked. Silence. Katsuki got angry. He hated the silence. Just what dream could he possibly have had that was so bad? 8. Furious, the blonde grabbed the Omega, his fist holding on tightly to the hoodie that he wore on his slender body. Not difficult, is it? The Alpha spoke, his voice harsh and cold. 17. With more fright, Izuku's eyes watered and tears fell as it stained his cheek. He was scared. 11. The Alpha held him for a little more before pushing him and letting go as the Omega fell onto the floor. Whatever, just be glad you're but didn't freeze, he spoke before he left the room, leaving the Omega in tears. He couldn't tell if it was better here or better back there, however he knew it was way better where he was. Only by a bit. Katsuki, on the other, had left the room annoyed and angry as he went to the living room, sitting on the living room on the couch. The mood changed quick between them two. Of course Katsuki didn't get on with Omegas, he only sheltered the Omega because he was told to. One whereas Izuku went into the bathroom and wiped his tears seeing his puffy eyes and he couldn't help but tear up as he saw himself was so hideous as the blonde walked with his friend home. They were planning to go trick-or-treating him Kirishima, Kaminari, Mina, Shiro. However, Katsuki's mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about Izuku, his Omega, or what he called his Omega. He had gotten used to calling him that now. 5A hand was waving in front of his face furiously and soon he now noticed. "Quit waving your hand in my face," the blonde spoke quiet annoyed by the continuous action. "Sorry you were just zoned out man," the red-haired male spoke as the blonde rolled his eyes. They all separated ways and Katsuki was left walking alone as he pulled his phone out putting his earbuds in and as he was about to put some music on he saw a caller ID. "My Omega is calling 8. He picked up as he heard sobbing through the phone and immediately began running his way back home. It was pretty natural for Izuku to have either a panic attack or anxiety attack, which lead to hyperventilation. For as the blonde ran getting random stares he pulled out his keys as he heard the call end and his hand shook from the cold air as it hit his warm hand. Finally as he opened the door he slammed it slipping his shoes off and ran straight to his room opening it and dropping his bag as he saw his Omega in the corner of the room, hugging his knees to his chest as he was tugging on his hair. The blonde ran to him as he got on his knees pulling the small petite figure that had gotten muscle from him being fed meat and other necessities that his body needed. He felt the body shake in his grasp as he rubbed soothing circles on the greenette's back as he felt his shoulder get warm from the tears that trickled down the Omega's eyes. The arms that were wrapped around his neck were holding on for dear life as if Katsuki would disappear if Izuku let go. Izuku shook violently as he held tightly onto the blonde. He didn't want to let go and he told himself he wouldn't let go. "Look, it's all right, I'm here and I'm not going anywhere," the blonde comforted as the grip on him didn't get weaker. "Can you breath with me?" the blonde asked as Izuku allowed some space between them to be made. The Alpha smiled as he used his hand to caress the Omega's cheek wiping its warm surface as the Omega stared into his eyes seeing the appealing red color beginning to soothe him and he focused on the blonde's chest as it would rise up as he breathed in and decrease as he would breath out and he copied just that. Good job," the Alpha praised as he saw a smile plaster on the Omega's face. 21 Soon enough Izuku calmed down and smiled as he hugged the blonde's neck once again. "You want to go trick-or-treating?" the blonde asked as Izuku backed away. "Trick-or-treating?" he spoke back in question. Yes, Izuku didn't know what it was, he knew people celebrated it but never understood it. "Yeah," the blonde spoke as Izuku nodded indeed happy. "We'll only be walking around and give candy to children if you like." "Yeah, and later the others want to play ding-dong ditch and want to egg some houses," the blonde spoke as Izuku's eyes sparkled with excitement and nervousness. 6 Isn't that bad? What if someone gets hurt? Izuku asked in worry. The blonde smiled. "That's why we have you, you're an Omega. Even if you haven't bandaged someone up before, you'll be good at doing it despite it being your first time," the blonde spoke as he kissed Izuku's neck gently. 10 The Omega purred and was happy he had never done anything like it and it got him excited. 6 2 As Izuku was ready he didn't really dress up of course, he only wore a collar just so it signified to any other alphas that he was taken even if he wasn't 5 The alpha didn't have to dress up, he only made his ears and tail visible followed on by his teeth that were sharp and sharp claw-like nails. It was good enough. "You ready?" the alpha asked as he walked behind the Omega hugging his stomach pulling their bodies so they were touching. Izuku nodded. 11 With that Izuku and Katsuki were with the others as it was dark at around 6. Izuku hated the dark but having the alpha around him soothed him knowing he had a protector. Children came up to Izuku to take a picture however he refused to as he didn't want any pictures taken of him as he had to be cautious as he was on the wanted list for trafficking. 2 They handed out sweets to kids and Mina. Kaminari kept themselves around Izuku constantly playing with his hair and complimenting him which made Izuku crumble and blush like a strawberry. 7 Katsuki on the other hand was happy as he held the greenette's hand comforted having him around and knowing he was around. Unfortunately Halloween would come to an end, and it wouldn't last forever sadly the Omega was sat alone for quite a while now, no sign of the blonde but he knew he was downstairs as he had went to go to the bathroom sometimes, seeing him watch TV. However he didn't want the blonde to sleep on the couch Izuku was in his room so. He really didn't deserve to be there. Hesitantly, Izuku opened the door, making sure he paused the episode he was watching of his now favorite cooking show, and descended the stairs. 6. Standing and watching the TV, he gulped before taking a seat on one of the couches. Katsuki the alpha had noticed him as he had left the room, his scent spreading. Izuku was nervous, and Katsuki could tell, his pheromones spreading and exposing his emotion. It angered him, but then again, on alpha instincts, he hated it and wanted to calm him down. Held firm. The Omega's breathing was heavy, heartbeat felt like a drum, his palms sweaty like a waterfall. He fumbled with his fingers as he glanced about anywhere he could before daring to set eyes upon the blonde. Izuku's voice hitched as it caused him to gulp and hold his hands, grasping whatever he could to relieve his stress. The blonde finally turned his attention, his head turning like a stiff doll as his eyes stared deeply into the Omega's green emerald eyes. 3. He stood up slowly, Izuku averting his eye contact towards the kitchen and then TV. As his footsteps creepily approached Izuku, the Omega didn't move, in fear of punishment if he had. He bent down to the greenette's height, staring into his eyes before seeing them gloss up. Pathetic? He stood up, his body overtowering the Omega in a fright. Just F off, the words came out more harshly than he thought, but he didn't care. The Omega's tears fell, and with that the Omega went to the garden and sat down on the floor, his knees to his chest and his head buried in his arms. He hated it. And himself. 11. On the other hand, Katsuki sighed before removing some strands of hair from his face and sat down. What an idiot, he thought, and sat back down watching TV. 8. 3. 14. It was 8:20 p.m. as Katsuki made himself dinner. Having to completely forgot about the Omega, he brushed his teeth heading to his room and turned the TV off, and with that he haed off to sleep with the warm comfort of his pillow against his face and his sheets protecting his body. 2. Izuku was still outside. This was what he would do when they would usually be mad at him, make him stay outside until they told him to come back in. Indeed, he was starving, but he couldn't go back in. He wasn't told to. He shivered. 6. 11:23 p.m. as Mitsuki entered her home. It was warm, quiet, and dark. She smiled, removing her heels from her feet, feeling relief of not having them on, and she placed her coat on the hanger and her bag down. Stumbling over to the kitchen as the back of her feet were managed up due to her heels, she turned on the kettle as it was quiet, taking out a cup and pouring the coffee and sugar pieces. Meanwhile, the kettle was boiling. She went to check on her son and Omega. Opening the door to see the one side of him, she couldn't spot the Omega. 2. Where is that Omega? What did this brat do now? Instead of waking the stupid blonde up, she left his room, deciding to look for the Omega first before awakening him. Her eyes filled with horror as she opened the door. With incredible speed and strength, she rushed over, feeling the winter of the night, and helped the Omega up, feeling his arms iced cold. Why are you out here? She asked as there was a look of worry and upset there. I didn't know if I was allowed back in, Izuku spoke as Mitsuki sighed. 9. Come in, honey, come in, of course you're allowed, she comforted as she led herself and Izuku inside, sitting him down on the couch before then making him a hot chocolate and covering him in warm blankets. 6. He drank it slowly as she soon made herself a coffee. Izuku only promised not to get in the alpha way. It was the best option, not to get in his way, as he would only anger the alpha, which was something he didn't want and didn't like doing. Can I sleep down here? Izuku asked as Mitsuki looked at him and nodded. She didn't want to force the Omega to sleep in the same room. She saw upset in the Omega's eyes, and it wasn't good. I just want you to know he's not like that. I really didn't raise him to be like his dad. Just wait till he warms up to you, Mitsuki smiles as Izuku does too. 12. 19. Izuku laid down with new clothes that were more his size. Mitsuki had bought for him, and he wore fluffy socks, fluffy bottoms, and a fluffy shirt, also followed on by an incredibly fluffy blanket he adored. 5. He had also been gifted with a notebook that Izuku could write in about his feeling or whatever he pleased, and a drawing book to satisfy his boredom since he couldn't go out. Mitsuki also informed him that a personal doctor of hers would be coming over to check in his heat and suppressants he would be given when on heat. He would also get information from him that would be written down. He was so nervous. Nervous enough it caused him to get sleep-tired and fall asleep. Plus the last thing he felt was a kiss on his forehead before he heard footsteps and his mind faded. 10. He was in a deep, deep sleep. Sunday, September 26, 20XX 7 time. 7:12 a.m. Izuku shivered, feeling the cold. He whimpered, remembering he would now have a doctor that would come in to check him out with his pheromones and everything. However, he knew he could do with knows he would be okay, but he couldn't help but feel nervous. The Alpha walked down the stairs as he saw what seemed to be the trembling Omega. He sniffed, not getting any sign of his heat or anything. However, he could smell stress and fell into comfort mode. Before he could do anything other than care for the Omega, he was already there on his knees as his hand had been entangled into the Omega's lock of hairs. One with that he had seen and smelt the Omega calm down. As Mitsuki made her way down, she was shocked with the sight of her son caring for the Omega. A smile caught on her face as she decided to go into the kitchen sneakily. 5. The Alpha had only now admired the Omega, and his scent was an incredibly alluring mint scent. He loved it as it smelt fresh and original. He smiled. 13. Breaking out of his trance, the Alpha stood back onto his feet as he heard the Omega purr of satisfaction from the Alpha's continuous and gentle tugs that he had done on his hair. 1. Meanwhile, the blonde thought he had finally gone crazy. Why was he so gentle with this Omega? Why would he just suddenly want to care for him? Why did he have that urge? "Good morning, Katsuki," his mother spoke, breaking him out of his that he described hideous thoughts. "Mornin'," he replied as he walked away into the kitchen where Mitsuki had just came from. He didn't question anything. He grabbed himself a glass water. "I'm going to the gym," he continued as he walked up the stairs, and the last thing you could hear was the door shut closed. 2. A sigh escaped Mitsuki's lips as she smiled. Her son looked so vulnerable at the specific moment. Walking over, she saw the Omega fidget before she replaced Katsuki and started gently patting his head. He stopped moving and his soft, quiet breaths escaped from his parted lips. The blonde threw on some shorts and a black tank top as he walked downstairs, seeing his mother pat the Omega gently and caress him, which had caused him to get angry for some unknown reason, and with that he rushed himself out of the house. 34. 11. For time, 11:32 a.m. He'll be here soon. Izuku okay? Mitsuki spoke as she saw the Omega get visibly nervous. She sat next to him, pulling him into an embrace. Despite knowing the doctor was a beta and incredibly smart for his knowledge, even if Mitsuki knew him for years, it still wasn't helping. The Omega was trembling. He didn't know the man. As a knock broke Izuku from his overthought thoughts, he glanced with wide eyes as tears had now flown down his face. Mitsuki stood from the couch, as much as she didn't want to let Izuku gosh had to, and she opened the door as she was greeted with a man that had blue hair, blue eyes and glasses. He used his finger to adjust them once again as he had always done. 24. "Come in, Mr. Tenya," she offered as the man nodded and entered. Izuku, on the other hand, had hidden himself inside the covers as if it would help. 12. "I apologize for his behavior. He's quiet, scared of alphas." "Even though you're not one," she spoke. She was quiet, embarrassed. Nevertheless, however, the male opposite her shook his head. "Not a worry at all," he spoke as a smile filled his expression. 3. Taking a seat on the one that was placed by the couch, he placed his case down and leaned, placing his elbows on his knees. "Hi there," he greeted softly, tugging at the covers that had protected Izuku. The Omega allowed it as he stared with teary eyes, seeing the male smile kindly, kinder than he has ever seen. Sniffles were heard as the man took out a tissue and dried his cheeks gently along with his eyes. "Izuku right?" asking. The Omega nodded, calming down. However, his beating heart didn't slow in pace. He was nicer, so he looked. "I'm Tenya Ida. I'll be asking you some questions that you can nod to if you don't want to speak. Is that fine with you?" He spoke in profession as Izuku nodded. 8. "Right," he replied as he took out a water bottle that was capped, handing it over to Izuku. The Omega inspected it as he opened it, hearing a click, knowing he hadn't opened it and it was safe to drink, so he did. Mitsuki meanwhile sat around for a while, listening in and awaiting for Katsuki's arrival as he said he would be home in about 5 minutes. "You're an Omega?" Izuku nodded. "How old are you?" he asked. Izuku held a 1 followed on by a 6. The male wrote away on the clipboard he held in his hand. "Do you have an alpha?" Izuku shook his head as he glanced down. "Do you have an alpha in mind?" he asked. Izuku thought for a while before going straight to Katsuki, however he shook his head. 13. "Have you had your heats yet?" Izuku nodded. "Are they irregular?" He nodded again. Questions were thrown back and forth as the Omega nodded to each on or shook his head. Okay, now to stabilize your heat I'm going to need to inject you dash. Whimpers were heard from the Omega as the male stared wide-eyed at the needle. The beta held it between his index and middle. Pheromones had started spreading as they were mostly distress and fear. Tears and memories had flashed back to Izuku. As the memory of a mysterious alpha appeared in front of him, he whimpered, backing away, his feet and arms in shackles as he sat on the cold, tiled floor nakedly, his mouth taped as his whimpers were muffled. The pain of the needle entering his arm sent a shock through his body as he moved away, causing the needle to escape. 9. The alpha shoved him into the cold floor as he felt blood seep onto the floor as the needle had entered his arm once again. Silence filled the room. Soon Izuku was wide-eyed as he couldn't explain what was going on right now. Felt lips on his that belonged to the one and only 31-3 Katsuki. Bakugo Islands filled the room. Soon Izuku was wide-eyed as he couldn't explain what was going on right now. Felt lips on his that belonged to the one and only 2 Katsuki. Bakugo 2. The lips the blonde had locked himself onto were soft and warm as the blood was circulating through them. They were plump, and without hesitation he had placed his own on them. 7. As he had entered the door of his home, he smelt the distress and fear. He was familiar with the scent, and seeing the sight of the Omega whimpering, covering himself for protection, the alpha's body moved on its own. The blonde finally backed off as he could tell the panic had been replaced with shock. Kneeling down, he sighed. You have to take this, it'll help you, and I'm here, okay? He spoke as Mitsuki smiled, and then she left on her way to work. 7. The Omega meanwhile blushed. It wasn't like those kisses he had experienced. It wasn't forceful, it was soft against his lips. The alpha sat beside the Omega, holding his hand in his own. He himself had not one idea of what he did and why he did that, but it was an instinct that came over him. He wanted to stop his Omega from whimpering. Smelling those pheromones made him hate it and made him want to take care of them. 12. Just focus on me, okay? He speaks softly as the Omega looks into his eyes, the appealing color captivating him as he stares and smiles. The male nods his head to the beta as he nods before injecting the needle into the Omega arm. Katsuki felt a tight squeeze from the Omega, and so he smiled. Before Izuku could make a sound, he was all done. They're all done. The beta speaks as he places a plaster on the wound and soon smiles before standing. He's going to sleep from the needle for a couple of hours, but it should stabilize his heat and he should receive them monthly. Ida spoke as the blonde nodded. Okay, that's it though. I'll be doing monthly visits to see how he is. He has PTSD as he has experienced some things I wouldn't ask questions about unless he felt comfortable. Signs of sleep deprivation and anxiety. The beta spoke more. 26. The Omega fell on Katsuki's shoulder as the male glanced and smiled. He was adorable. With that, the alpha got the Omega comfortable on the couch, making sure he wasn't laying on the arm he had just got the injection on. 2. Meanwhile, he waved the beta off and headed to the shower. 1. The warm water was hitting every part of the blonde's body. It ran down his shoulders, dripped from his hair, ran down his abs, his muscles. 28. The soap he had used was expanding in amounts as water was soaked in, and soon the blonde was covered in soap, and he rinsed himself off as he satisfyingly smiled, seeing the mirrors in the bathroom fog up. 5. He stepped out the shower, making sure it was off as water leaked off of him and he had dried his hair. However, he heard and could smell pheromones sweep through the door, and in quick speed he wrapped a towel around his waist and rushed out. Izuku had been on the floor as he struggled to get up as his arm was in pain from the needle. The alpha sighed as he kneeled down and helped him up. It's alright, I'm here, he spoke. 1. The Omega hugged the blonde, feeling comfort and warmth radiate from him. Lifting the small Omega, the alpha did, he placed him on the couch. Stay here, okay? The alpha spoke as Izuku nodded with a whimper. With rush, the alpha hurried to the bathroom, putting on his boxers and his shorts, forgetting his shirt as he took his things, putting them in the laundry basket. With it, he walked over to Izuku, seeing him shake furiously as he sat on the couch, getting himself comfortable underneath a small blanket. Patting his lap, Izuku had immediately got onto it, burying his nose in his neck, and the alpha covered the Omega up with a thicker and softer blanket. Was the alpha possibly near his rut? No, never acts like this. It had happened so fast. The started caring for the Omega so fast, just what had happened when he had went out for training. For the Omega smelt caramel from the alpha and with a calming nature, fell asleep, Tears had stopped and he had calmed down. Meanwhile, the Alpha slowly started to fall asleep. Feeling relieved that the Omega had calmed and fallen asleep in his arms, he soon fell asleep, calm, happy and himself relieved. Katsuki's POV. What the hell is wrong with me? As soon as I see the old hang pet him just as I did, I feel jealous all of a sudden, which pisses me off, and I don't know why. Leaving the house washes a relief over me and I no longer feel jealous. Just why did I feel jealous? She was only petting him and helping him sleep, and here I am being jealous. For I sigh incredibly loud and I walk, making sure to look where I'm going. His scent was nice and smelt nice and fresh. Wait, no, I'm probably just saying this because I'm going to go into a rut. Or maybe my mind is playing tricks on me. The more I try to fool my mind, I know that what I think is just being said, as I refuse the fact that I may have taken a liking to him. I suddenly bump into someone and I back off, glaring at them, to only realize it's my friend Kirishimo. Third person one. As the two males bump into each other, the red-haired alpha only smiles, a surprised look on his face. "Oh hey, Baku bro. Didn't expect you here," he spoke as the blonde rolled his eyes and sighed, relieved it was not another stranger. "Hi," the blonde replied as he looked down. Immediately the alpha knew something was wrong with his hot-tempered friend. "What's wrong? You look like you have a load on your mind," the male asked as the blonde sighed before walking to the gym, having the other alpha follow him as if he were a puppy. "So what's wrong, man?" the red-haired alpha pries as the blonde stretches, making sure when he lifts the weights he won't pull a muscle, as he has done it and was bedridden for 2 weeks. Nothing, he replied. Of course, the red-haired alpha didn't believe him one bit. "Look man, I know something is bothering you, you can talk to me," the male spoke as the blonde sighed before sitting down, finally giving in. "There's this Omega and I don't know, booty, have the need to care for him, protect him, it's so stupid," the blonde complained, finally able to open up as the other alpha listened to him. Soon a smile appeared on his face and he couldn't help but feel like his friend was stupid. "You think?" he asked, confusion in his tone. The male, however, had never seen his friend so confused, the look in his eye, the concentration his eyes held. "Of course, but moreover, I think you should go to your therapy to talk, you know," Kirishima spoke as the blonde sighed. The gym was empty for most of it, the lights on as they were bright, the mirrors that were reflecting the weight equipment, and it was only the two alphas there. For the alpha was sat on a couch, pretty comfy if you could say. The male sat on the seat fixing up his glasses, and with that, he smiled. "Right, what seems to be the problem, Katsuki?" The voice spoke as the blonde glanced at him before sinking into the seat, getting all the lot more comfortable. "It's an Omega," he started as the male took a note before nodding his head, allowing him to continue further. "I feel weird and I hate it," he spoke further as a frown formed on his face. The image of the Omega had popped into his head, with that he felt soft, but he shook his head. "Describe it to me," the male spoke as he took notes. Unsure of what he was taking note of, the movement of his pen across the clipboard was heard and seen. "I don't know, I feel soft inside, it's weird, I want to care, I feel jealous." The sound of his voice was annoyance followed on with uncertainty as he described those specific emotions. "You said an Omega." The older spoke as he placed his clipboard down and stared at the blonde. The two were alphas, however they didn't have a hatred for each other, they didn't have the need to fight for position, they didn't lead a pack either, except for Katsuki. "Yeah," he confirmed as the man smiled for the first time. What are you smiling about, old, sleep-deprived man?" The blonde insulted, making the man chuckle, and he sighed. 25, you really are naive, he spoke back as the blonde glared, however it eased. "Why is something wrong with me?" The male was worried for his own health. The curly black-haired alpha shook his head as he fixed his glasses and grabbed his pen. 10, seems to me that you're going into that phase of being an alpha, he spoke. 14, the sound of footsteps trotting along the pavement was the only thing heard, along with some crunchy leaves that were crushed beneath the alpha's combat boots. His eyes hadn't left the floor at once as he was zoned out throughout the whole walk home. There was nothing more that went through his head other than the fact that he was being an alpha, finally breaking out of his shell and going with his alpha instincts. Sensing how close he was home, his heart increased in beats and his breathing got heavier. He was nervous, agitated, sweating. Seriously, what was wrong with him? 3 As he approached the door to his home, his body tensed up and his fangs immediately grew out of his mouth, sharp, dangerous, and possessive. The pheromones that had hit his nose as he stared at the sight of the green Omega. Fear, trauma, and tears. Plus, with that, the blonde had rushed. His whole demeanor changed as he grabbed the Omega in his arms in comfort. Himself unsure of what the hell he was doing. Izuku's POV. The pain in my arm is unbearable, whimpers leaving my lips. Unsure of what's going on, I attempt to slip out of the Alpha's arms only to fail, my body getting hot, and seemingly wanting more of the Alpha's scent on me. Shaking my head vigorously, I whimper even more. The material of my clothes now becoming unbearable to rest on my skin. Finally the Alpha shuffles, his arms falling off of me as I immediately get off. Rushing in immediate desperation to the bathroom, and I lock the door in complete utter fear of the Alpha and my heat. Pulling my hair once again of desperation relieves me. As I feel hot, I turn on the bath water, and with that the shower head sprinkles water as I get undressed, stepping into the bath, and with that have the ice-cold water hit my body. However, to my disliking, it helps in no way. Panting from my heat, it's uncontrollable, the lewd thoughts turn me on, but I keep myself in control. Am I meant to be on my heat after that jab? Why did I get it? I need help. As the water continuously hits the surface of my skin, it seems to not work at all, my body increasing its temperature, feeling my pheromones spew out of control. I curl into a ball, laying there, in hope that it'll be over, pulling my hair of frustration, want, need, love, and lust. 11 Please be over. Third person. The blonde had awoken to the cold, his arms empty, confused at where his Omega was. He had assumed the smaller was in the bathroom, however it was unusual to hear the water going off. Immediate alarms caused him to spring up into action as he now sat up, getting up from the couch. Grabbing a hold of his shirt, sniffing it to only sense distress, lust, want, need all in one, and with that headed over to the bathroom, knocking lightly on it. For Izuku head perked up to the sound of the door, knowing right in an instant it was the Alpha, so bad, wanting to open the door, but refusing, so he sat there in the cold. Omega, the blonde spoke as gently as possible. 6 The blonde knew Izuku was in, now, an emotional state, therefore if he said it in a harsh, sharp tone, he'd scare the Omega, which he didn't want. There was no response, but silence. The sound of the night barely being audible from the inner walls of the house. However, the night sure made a presence with the sky, coating it with a passionate blue, filled with bright stars. Izuku, you can let me in, the Alpha speeches out. His voice yet again nothing but gentle. 14 When it was Izuku's first time in that place, he did just exactly this, as it was his first ever heat, the overpowering pheromones forcing it. The Alphas weren't nice, as they would scream at him as they banged the door in utter anger, cussing at him. So he was on pills, which made his heats irregular and unnoticeable. But the blonde sounded so gentle. Izuku wanted to open the door, and so, stepping out of the shower, the water still going, his body became adapted to the heat of the house. Immediately disliking it, feeling his body increase in temperature, his heart was now beating as he unlocked the door and quickly jumped back into the bath, feeling the water cool him down, just even a little bit. The Alpha entered. Seeing the sight of the Omega hurt him but made him happy. Knowing the Omega trusted him enough to just open the door for him, he smiled. He had quite the education on Omegas. He had went to an all-Alpha school so they could learn what they needed to as an Alpha, and they learnt a lot on Omegas. How it was their job to mate with them. Their job to mark them. Their job to provide. It was basically the reality of society. Katsuki kneeled down by the bath. He felt so calm, so mature, it was odd, but he ignored it and let him be. You okay? The blonde asked towards the Omega, as Izuku glanced. Seeing the Alpha made him want to jump with joy, but he refrained himself. He gained a head shake from the Omega as he smiled. Finally he was jumping into the Alpha nature. Look, you can't sit here all night. I know it cools you down even just a little, but it'll only get worse sitting underneath the cold, the Alpha reasoned, and with that his speech got obeyed as the Omega stepped out. The water was off. There was silence. Izuku was placed in the Alpha's lap. Nose in his neck. Arms on his shoulders. 10 He was hoisted off the ground along with the Alpha, feeling so much better, smelling the more manly, diamante, earthy, sweet scent. He was calm and in the right mind, not being as hit as before. The blonde walked them both out, the Omega in his arms. Relieved, the Omega listened. 2 leading them back onto the couch. The soft delight of the couch, the Alpha sat the Omega naked in his arms, hugging his body tight. Knowing the Omega wanted more and that he wanted more, he held back. He had to take care of the Omega first, not take advantage. Monday, September 27th, 20XX, 4:32 a.m. Unfortunately, the Alpha had school. Meaning Izuku was left to his mother, who had kindly taken time off her work since his education was more important. Even though he insisted on staying and taking care of his Omega, she refused to allow such thing. 𝗏𝗏 was working, so it wasn't a worry. And actually he had received 3 days off of work due to his hard work and cooperation. He received a raise, which you could guess, was given to BakuDeku. For BakuDeku could do nothing but have his mind filled with if Izuku was okay, and what if this happened. He was more than worried and he didn't want to be. His therapist explained that he was going through that phase and becoming a real alpha, but what did that mean? His therapist didn't even bother explaining. 2. He was more than annoyed he had to leave Izuku and that he couldn't get the answers he had wanted. But before he knew it, he was there at school. Schoolgirls from many years flooded around him as they clung onto him but soon backed away as they smelt an Omega scent that wasn't theirs. They were angry. To BakuDeku, this was great news, meaning no more clinging for him. Maybe having an Omega wasn't bad. He made his way to class as females spoke and a lot of attention was brought from different students. However, it all had to end as BakuDeku finally made it to class. He smiled as he waved the Omegas off and sat at his seat. 5. He's never been so happy of an Omega not clinging on to him. He had his own personal army of Omegas. But there was something more unusual than that. Katsuki didn't touch any of them, pet them on the head, tease them like he would usually to any other Omega, and he didn't know why. He just didn't feel like it, and it didn't cross his mind. All that was on his mind that time was Izuku. Suddenly, a tight grip on his shoulder had seemed to scare him out of his thought as he saw his friend Kirishima. "Hey man, what's got you so distracted?" Kirishima asked. The male had grabbed himself a seat as he placed it opposite BakuDeku's. "Something happening to me," BakuDeku explained as he stared frantically at his alpha friend. His friend backed away confused, before he crosses his arms leaning back into his chair. "Explain what you mean," the male spoke back. He wanted more detail. "Well, BakuDeku began. 9. Izuku woke up to being alone in bed. He sat up panicking, not seeing the alpha he had wanted, and shakily stepped out of bed. Leaving the room and walking down the stairs. Mitsuki was on the couch as Masaru was at the dinner table doing his work on his Apple MacBook. 10. Izuku let out a piff of breath as it had released pheromones, and Mitsuki stood up walking towards the Omega and ruffled his hair. "Good morning, your alpha's at school," Mitsuki explained. To the words "your alpha" had sent a cute and needy mule or through Izuku's throat, causing Mitsuki to squeal in awe. 11. If you don't mind, I'll be making food for you, and I know you'd prefer it if your alpha did, but unfortunately he's not home, Mitsuki spoke. 9. Izuku didn't like the sound of someone else making his food, but then he had to allow it. He himself didn't know how to make food and his alpha wasn't home, so he couldn't starve, and he highly doubted Mitsuki would allow that. So he simply nodded. Izuku sat down staring at Masaru, seeing that him and BakuDeku looked nothing alike. The man had brown hair and brown eyes. He looked more like his mother. He had more of his mother's personality, but then again slightly his father's, which was kind and caring. 13. Soon the man glanced at Izuku and smiled. "Good morning," he spoke. "Good morning," Izuku replied back as he glanced down and played with his fingers, nervous. Mitsuki was working in the kitchen as she was humming a tune. Meanwhile, Masaru and Izuku are sitting in silence, unable to think of anything to speak of. For man, that's some tough SHT, but isn't it good you have an Omega? The red-haired alpha asks. BakuDeku then sighs and shrugs. "I don't want to have an Omega. I mean, yeah, I do, but I don't want my personality to change," he explains more further. "Bro, I don't think anything is changing. You'll just act differently towards your or the Omega," Kirishima answers. Not like the male knew anything about it, but he still tried helping and making sense of everything. He did know quite a bit about Omegas and Alphas, more than BakuDeku since he actually decided to listen in class when necessary. The bell then went and soon the class began flooding with students, and so the day had only just began for the alpha, but he couldn't help but think about his omega. He was so possessive of Izuku already. His omega. Izuku had attempted to enjoy breakfast and at least fill his stomach not to lose any more weight than he already has. However, it wasn't good. He was currently throwing up in the bathroom, unable to stomach any food for some unknown reason. The woman rubbed the Omega's back and handed him a cup which he gladly took and gulped in an instant. For some reason Izuku wasn't able to stomach her food. "You okay?" the woman asked, worry present in her voice. Izuku nodded, his body beginning to feel hot and his pheromones escaped. Another heat wave, he thought. It was all new and he wasn't used to, acknowledging the fact that he used to use suppressants for his heats to cover them up and make them less painful. Now he was doing the opposite, forcing his heat to make it more stable. It was the pain and his anxiousness that was causing the heat to be more severe. Mitsuki took out her phone as she heard more throwing up and with that dialed the one and only. The male's phone rang and he fixed his glasses, he put his papers down and smiled. "Don't worry, I'll be there soon," he comforted. Lifting himself from his seat, he left his office. Sighing, the blonde woman stood up and with that retrieved another glass of water for the Omega. Her husband was still sat sipping coffee and they made brief eye contact. "How's the little one?" Masaru questioned. Seeing his wife sigh in frustration, he stood walking over to her. "Not good. I'm assuming he's thrown up the contents of that food," she worried, staring into the still water that was sat in the glass. The alpha placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Don't worry too much, love." He smiled before the sound of a knock at the door sent the two of them alert. Her retrieved the door, greeting the male back into their home before informing him of the current situation. Meanwhile, Mitsuki was sat beside the Omega as she rubbed soothing circles on his now bare back. "How is he, Mitsuki?" the male asked as he kneeled down inspecting Izuku's condition. "He's thrown the contents of the food I made," Mitsuki replied. Another throwing up sound and sound of water splashing had filled the bathroom walls. "You do know there's nothing to worry about?" the male asked as Mitsuki looked and once again seemed to sigh what seemed to only be the 100th time. "I know, but I can't help but worry. Me and my husband can't go where we want to go today without supervising him," Mitsuki spoke. The blue-haired male smiled. "You two can go. I'll watch over him and wait for your son to return," he suggested in a way. Mitsuki looked at him as if saying really, but mainly with her eyes, and the beta nodded in agreement. "It's not a big deal. The two of you don't know much on Omegas, and I don't need the two of you worrying. Go and have fun. He's in good hands," the male comforted. Mitsuki smiled before thanking the beta. She left the bathroom. 11 taking out tissue, the beta wiped the Omega's mouth before smiling. "I'm sure you remember me, Izuku," the male spoke. Izuku looked before nodding and shuffling away. "Don't worry, I'm only supervising you. I don't have anything on me." In evidence, the male lifts his hands, turns his pockets inside out and stands up, patting himself down. "See?" he smiles as Izuku flushes the toilet. "Is this normal?" the Omega mumbles. The beta keeps up his smile, his knees on the floor as he takes off his blazer and applies it to the Omega's shoulders, hiding his body. "Of course, seemingly you've been using suppressants to stop your heats, which can be quite damaging to your body alone, but this is normal, just more severe," the beta admits as Izuku lets a wave of heat rush over him. Izuku's body shivered intensely, tears fell. He didn't want to go through it, the experiences coming back to him, his lips quivered. Ida the beta frowned in worry, glad he wasn't an alpha, knowing that's what he would need at this sensitive moment. 5 The Omega soon felt a feeling of tranquility run over him like a fast-speeding car. He felt his eyelids droop out of exhaustion. He was in heat, but at the same time throwing up made him ready to drop. A voice broke him out of his hazy, sleepy daze. "Let's get you to bed." Walking up the steps, Izuku was asleep. The beta had carried Izuku up and into Bakugo's room. Entering and apologizing for doing so when the male was not present at home, he allowed Izuku to sink into the comforting mattress of the bed and with that left. Meanwhile, the beta was sat on the couch downstairs, having his laptop out and completing any remaining work he had. He sighed. Plus Bakugo's POV. "I'm 2 lessons into the day, and there's nothing more I feel than dreariness. I'm sad in maths. The class at the back sending whispers to their mates, however it's not whispering seemingly as it's reaching to the front of the class. The teacher sighs, visibly more than aggravated. He turned his attention to the class and dead silence followed on. It's always like that, the teacher turns their back and the chatter starts again. It gets quite irritating after a while. I yawn out of tiredness and feel my phone buzz in the pocket of my uniform and take it out, seeing a text from the hag. Mitsuki, good morning, my Dr. Ida is at the house taking care of Izuku. That's all it said, and I groaned, gaining attention as I fished my phone back into my pocket, duplicating what the teacher has wrote on the large screen sitting ahead of me. I can't help but now think about the omega. Why am I so fetched with the omega? It's just a stupid omega, and here I am caring for the thing. It makes no sense. I shake my head what is seemingly the 1000th time. Before I know it, the bell rings, causing me to jump out my seat and dash outside my classroom. Finally having a 10-minute break before 3 more excessive periods of boring lessons. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 as I climb up to the rooftop, sitting on the cold flooring, and take out my phone. Sadly, I don't have the omega's number. Wait, why am I worried about that? There's something wrong with me. The words of my therapist fills my mind. There's no way I'm really warming up to an omega. I've been with a few, but why is he different? 1. Everything has been messed up ever since the DMN omega came. I gotta go. Texting the old hag, I send her a simple message. Katsuki, I'm going therapy. 2. That was all I sent before I made my way down, bumping into Redhead. Third person. For the 2 alphas bumped into each other, the other laughed. Gee, I was looking for you. The male spoke as he sighed of relief. I'm leaving, the blonde simply announced as the male opposite him, eyes widened. Did something happen? Kirishima asked, worried for his friend. He wasn't wrong, something did happen, but it wasn't serious. No, he spoke. The alpha followed the blonde off to the receptionist. He told the woman he was leaving and she asked why ECT. He gave her a note that allowed him to leave the school's premises, and with that he waved his alpha friend off as he left. Boy, was he glad his grades were good. If they weren't, he'd be stuck in school longer than his liking. Walking his way to therapy, the alpha preferred walking than taking public transport. It was a good way to take his mind. For at least a bit. But before he knew it, he arrived faster than anticipated. Entering the building for therapy, it felt more like a clinic. But when walking into a room to start the session, it was more homey. It was filled with documents and books that filled the empty space of the wall. As if on Izawa, Katsuki's therapist walked out of the break room, the 2 made eye contact. Aren't you supposed to be in school? The man spoke, walking to his room with a coffee in hand. Nitaruk, the blonde spoke. The older man smiled. Come in, he welcomed, holding the door for the alpha. 11. The blonde walked in, seating himself onto the couch, making himself comfortable as he laid down, finally happy, letting his eyes fall. The room brought tremendous amounts of memories. He felt safe there. The whole reason the blonde was in therapy was because of the old hag. He couldn't say he regretted it though. He actually enjoyed it, having someone to talk to instead of being judged and criticized on his problems. Izawa took a seat on his chair as he opened up a black notebook with a shiny K at the front. It's where he took notes of the blonde's feelings, problems and improvements, happy moments, etc. The room belonged to Izawa. No one used it. Every therapist had their own room. You wouldn't want others snooping around. Sipping his coffee, the male held his pen as he wrote down the date. As always, it was good to have a date on each session, so you knew when it took place. Want a snack? The alpha asked. The blonde looked. What do you have? He asked back. The alpha smiled before pointing to a large drawer, allowing the blonde to approach and search. Katsuki ended up taking a bag of crisps, spicy, because he loved spice. Whoever didn't were just sensitive to the burning feeling whenever it got too hot on their tongues. Katsuki deeply loved it though. He never got a runny nose like others did. I know, right? 16. The alpha, that was sat on the brown, four-legged chair, glanced at the time, writing it down. Session 30, he spoke out loud, and from there the blonde knew their session had began. He leaned back, relaxing his shoulders, letting the heat of the crisps ease him and relax him further. The alpha opposite him sipped his coffee, sensing the alpha's comfort and beginning his questioning. How are you today? The alpha asked. It was one Izawa seemed to always ask. The door of the home brought the beta's attention as he stared. Seeing Katsuki, he sighed of relief. but the blonde seemed to be earlier than usual, meaning he left school early and went for his therapy session. It was 1 in the afternoon. The blue-haired male stood up as the blonde walked over, waiting to be updated. The Omega is in your room. He's in heat because of the shot I gave him. As you know, he's very sensitive and needs an alpha beside him. Iida spoke. The blonde nodded. You can go, Katsuki finally spoke. The male opposite him nodded with a bow. Do not take advantage and comfort him. Make him food too. I'm sure he'll eat from you. Those were the last words of the beta before he left through the front door. To Katsuki, phone buzzed as he took out, revealing his mother's name on the front screen. Mitsuki, no worries, please make Izuku eat something. He threw up his food from the morning. I'm sure he'll take food from you. Don't take advantage. Love you. Take care. To the blonde was slightly offended. He couldn't deny. His mother really thought he would take advantage of an Omega. What kind of alpha did she think she raised? Clenching his phone, he sighed and shook his head. He should focus on Izuku first. The faster the Omega could recover, the faster he could also leave their home. It's not like Izuku would be staying there for a long period of time. He had to leave eventually, right? 5 Walking into the kitchen, he decided to make soup, something the Omega could easily digest. He began. For on the other side, Izuku stirred in the alpha's bed, feeling hot. He left the bed, stumbling over his own feet, making it to the bathroom, opening the door and turning on the water to cold. It was too hot and he wanted to cool himself down. The cold water felt warm to his disliking. It was probably incredibly ice cold, and here he felt as if warm water was sprinkling on him. It did help slightly. Izuku had never felt like this, and he knew it was the cause of the shot the beta had given him, and it was the moment where the alpha instinctively kissed Izuku to calm him down and take the shot. But it's not like it meant anything, and because of his sensitive state it hurt Izuku deeply. It took around half an hour to around 2 before the blonde made his way to his room, opening it to be met with intense pheromones. They smelt so delicious, and his alpha the scent. After a mere second of spacing out, he came back to his senses. Izuku wasn't in bed. The blonde placed the bowl down, hearing the shower running. Hurriedly he opened the door to reveal the Omega, eyes closed, sat in the open shower. The blonde mentally slapped himself. The water stopped sprinkling, causing Izuku to shudder. Looking and seeing the alpha, immediately he whimpered, hearing the male's 𝗕𝗵𝗲 voice. Stupid, is all the alpha said before a large towel was wrapped around the Omega's frail body. The alpha's touch was gentle as he picked up the freezing Omega into his arms, into his warm, radiating body. He felt the Omega shudder and he placed Izuku down. You're not meant to go into the shower when you're in heat, the alpha spoke. Izuku looked confused. It helped, slightly. Katsuki shook his head. There was no use in explaining. I made soup, you need to eat, I heard, Katsuki said. Izuku didn't say anything. The towel covered his legs, leaving his torso exposed, bruises accompanied that were healing slowly. The alpha retrieved the bowl from the desk as he kneels in front of the Omega and motions the spoon towards Izuku. The Omega takes it, his stomach finally being able to digest the food. Happily, Izuku was fed by the alpha before being tucked under the sheets. My scent is there, so you'll be fine, Katsuki. He stood to only be stopped with a weak grip on his wrist. Don't go, Izuku mumbled, fear and upset lacing his voice. Katsuki let out a small chuckle before moving the hair that fell into Izuku's eye, tucking it behind his ear before speaking. I'm only jumping into the shower. Relax, I'm in the room. I'm not going anywhere, he reassured as Izuku let go, letting his eyes take over. The alpha smiled, seeing the Omega in peace. His scent was really getting to the alpha. As much as he didn't want it to, it was slowly getting to him, and the more it did, the more he loved every bit that escaped Izuku's neck. He had to go before he ended up sniffing Izuku's neck out of instincts, before he got overprotective, before he clutched onto the smaller body. Not like it's what he wanted, it was simply the heat of the moment. Get it? Heat of the moment. Okay, you know, 20 Katsuki decided to get into the shower, refresh himself. He recalled the long session he had with Izuku. Knew the alpha was right. Maybe Izuku did mean something to the blonde, but he wanted to deny it. But then it wouldn't make sense to why he felt everything he did despite being with other Omegas in their heats. He sighed. He only knew Izuku for only a few days, so why? Just why did he feel the way he did? The blonde had exited the bathroom with ease, feeling refreshed and warm from the warm water that sprinkled on his body. having a towel draped over his V-line and another that he ruffled his hair into, preventing water droplets to fall into the carpet of his room. He listened to the background noise, which was the TV, as the Omega slept peacefully. He was surprised the Omega actually listened and was able to keep away from the Alpha. Usually, it's difficult to keep away from an Alpha during an Omega's heat, no matter if it was someone they knew or not. But Izuku was different. Maybe it was because of the things he's experienced. Katsuki finally got his things and dressed, putting on his boxers and baggy trousers with black ankle-length socks. He got into bed, his back against the dashboard, and with that began searching through YouTube and was watching people play horror games. There was nothing much for him to do. He did instinctively glance over to the Omega from time to time, to see if he were okay. There was a moment where he just stared, admiring his features again. For the freckles, his light snores, his intoxicating scent, his messy curls, his button-like nose, his small figure, his eyelashes that were long and gorgeous. He admired it all. Tenny shook his head as he did, thinking of what he was doing and why he was, then recalled back to him and his therapist's session. He's never felt a bond to an Omega before. Maybe it's because Izuku was different and not an Omega that clung on to him or didn't ask or beg for attention. Maybe the blonde needed to sleep, and that's exactly what he was going to do, sleep. Switching off the TV, he turned towards the Omega, inching closer. He buried his nose into the Omega's neck, being able to this time vividly smell the male. He smelt of mint, fresh mint, lust and want, mixing with it as if fruits in a blender, and it aroused the blonde. It only took 2 sniffs before the blonde protectively wrapped his arm around Izuku's waist and pulled the male's back into his chest, having the Omega's size fit his as he hugged him like a missing piece in a puzzle. His nose was located by Izuku's neck once again, as his curls tingled his face, but he didn't care. Having his Omega in his arms was what was important. He felt his body relax, not having noticed he was so tense all along. His eyes grew tired. He felt like a sloth, tired and ready to sleep. 3 sleep had won over the blonde, and with that he fell asleep in the comfort of his Omega around 12 at night. Mitsuki and Masaru had returned from their day out, exhausted as the both of them held shopping bags and laughed as they entered the warmth of their home. Turning on the living room light, they set the heavy bags on the smooth wooden surface of the shiny table. The two had died down from the laughter as they immediately met the warmth, taking off their jackets and shoes and began unpacking the bags, placing whatever had to go into the freezer there and whatever belonged into the fridge there. Snack and treats were brought as extra. "It's awfully silent," Mitsuki commented as her husband hummed in response, taking the milk from her possession. "I'm assuming the two are asleep," she spoke once again. She made her way up the stairs but was stopped by the husband as he shook his head, and the two returned back to the living room. 5. The blonde awoken to movement, or constant shaking that his alpha nature couldn't bypass. He sat up on his elbow, glancing at the Omega. Seeing the male frown, he sighed, shaking the smaller awake. Izuku's eyes fluttered open. His frowning had ceased once he had taken into account where he was, who he was with, and that his dream was just a figurative imagination. He sighed of relief. However, Izuku blushed. Despite the darkness, the Alpha could see it clear as daylight. He smiled and pulled the Omega to his chest, causing Izuku to only move a little before speaking. "Are you sure?" Glancing down nervously, his blush had only darkened as he felt the Alpha's arms hug his body and his musky scent fill his nostrils as the two were inseparably close. "Knock yourself out," Katsuki replied, a tired yawn escaping him. He was too tired to fight or get angry, and he highly doubted his neighbors would be happy to hear yelling at around 1 or 2 in the morning. Taking the offer, the freckle-faced male nodded and buried his nose further into the Alpha's shirt. Internally, he wanted to lose control, and he knew he was bound to from being so close to an Alpha, but at the same time, he felt safe. He felt wanted. He felt loved. But that was only because of the heat. Maybe when he got off it, the two would be back to the first time they met. For Izuku's scent leaked of distress and nervousness, unable to contain his emotions due to his state. Suddenly, he felt circles being placed on his back, his eyes closing as he focused on the hand movement than more of his problems. He was going to take advantage of this. This was the first time an Alpha had truly cared. Saturday, October 2nd, 20XX. Izuku's heat had passed. Katsuki had successfully kept himself in control, not touching the Omega or taking advantage when he had opportunities to. Or like Izuku thought the alpha would. However, after Izuku's heat he was right. Katsuki was back to not speaking to Izuku or communicating whatsoever, pretending like Izuku was not there. It was just because he was in heat, and the Greenette knew it would end like this. The two males slept on the bed, backs against one another, Izuku's pheromones more in control as Masaru took Izuku to the doctor to help control his pheromones. The kiss that the alpha had initiated had stayed with Izuku, finding himself constantly thinking about it when his brain was vacant. It meant nothing and he attempted to tell himself that, but it meant more than what he liked it to. The alpha was often found, playing games, sleeping, going out somewhere which Izuku frowned at because as Katsuki came back another Omega's scent was on him. He hated it but he said nothing. Izuku was invisible to Katsuki. 5. Currently the small Omega was sat on the couch with Mitsuki as the woman flipped through channels, finally landing on the news AMD listening to the person reporting. So you are willing to find this Omega? The woman hands over the microphone to the two alphas as they had been asked a question. The men looked familiar. Izuku's eyes widened as his pheromones began escaping, his eyes zoned out from reality. Yes, we are. He means a lot to our working environment and we won't give up on him. If you ever see him, this is how he looks. The alpha lifts a photo revealing Izuku's picture, a picture of him smiling. The reporter only awes despite not knowing what work the men do. Mitsuki turned off the TV in attempt to comfort Izuku but she is unable to do so. She begins to panic as she stares at the lifeless look in the male's eyes, his breathing unsteady. Hurriedly she stands from the couch rushing upstairs. Katsuki, Izuku, please come down. Unable to form words, the alpha follows his mother down into the living room. The scent that mixed with the air was filled with emotion. Katsuki walked over to Izuku. Placing his hand on Izuku's hand, gaining no reaction as the male was curled in a ball. He pulls Izuku's legs away from his chest hearing a whimper, and with that he parts Izuku's leg placing his knee in the middle and with that his lips connected with the Omega's. 7. Their lips fit like a puzzle and it had taken Izuku out of his trance as the blonde began moving his lips initiating more, that Izuku allowed, his hands shaking and the blonde backed away as soon as possible. But what? Why did the blonde kiss him again? What did he want? 1. Tears fell from the Omega's eyes as Mitsuki embraced him as Katsuki headed for the stairs, back into the cave of his room. 18. You're safe, Mitsuki comforted, holding the Omega in her arms. Izuku only hugged back, incredibly tightly as if his life depended on it. Well, his life did depend on her, people were searching for him and this was his only hiding. What if they found him? Katsuki would no longer be there. He'd be back to being used as a sex toy. 9. Izuku eased in no time, finding himself in a warm blanket that Izuku had introduced him to and now he felt as if that blanket would protect him from his life and problems. He snuggled into the blanket. This blanket was his only place of peace, his place of no worries. This blanket of peace had put him to sleep. Mitsuki frowned as she stared at the humble Omega. Not because she was angry but she hated that Izuku was in danger, was wanted by terrible people, but seeing him here beginning to gain some weight as he was being fed, well, it made her smile. It made her happy that they made a difference, but something was wrong with her son. He kissed Izuku and left. And even she wondered why. 10. It hit 10. Mitsuki made her way to Katsuki's room, opening the door, to reveal the alpha in bed, shirt off as he laid there, the TV on the wall on. Katsuki, the woman began. The alpha looked, showing he was listening. Why did you kiss Izuku? You know you'll give him the wrong idea. Mitsuki spoke. The alpha stared before he sighed. Look, I'm trying to figure out my year. He spoke. Mitsuki frowned yet again as she crossed her arms. And ignoring Izuku and kissing him makes it better, huh? She spoke. She made a point and Katsuki stayed silent. 1. Just come take him, he's asleep, maybe try to spend time with him and will he figured, she cursed. The alpha frowned as he stood from the bed. Following her downstairs and lifting Izuku, he stared at the Omega, taking him upstairs before placing him under the covers and getting into bed himself. Staring at Izuku, the alpha frowned, however he smiled. Kissing Izuku when he did, he liked it. He wanted more. Shook his head. Maybe it was okay, like his therapist said. He turned his body towards Izuku. There he found himself moving closer until the Omega was in his arms. Feeling comfort in the new and modern feeling, he hugged the Omega tightly, taking in his scent. Maybe it was okay. Sunday, October 3rd, 20XX. One awakening. Izuku's tired eyes opened, feeling incredible warmth envelope his whole body. It was October, nearly winter, but he felt so warm. Opening his eyes, he realized he was no longer in the living room but in a familiar furnished room. Familiar warmth, he had felt this before. Turning his body, he dreaded to reveal the alpha that had ignored him for a whole week until now. The male was now sharing his warmth with the Omega, but why the sudden change? Struggling out of his hold, the alpha let go, feeling the struggle against his hold as he rubbed his eyes, yawning as Izuku frowned. "I'm sorry," Izuku apologized, unsure of what for. The alpha sits up, before speaking. "What are you apologizing for?" His voice was deep and it rasped as every word was spoken from his lips. Izuku just glanced down, confused why the alpha wasn't mad. Usually alphas hated when omegas slept with them, so Izuku would sleep on the floor or couch, depending the alpha. Even if Izuku was in Hecate and the alpha had embraced him, he hadn't quite remembered too well. Heats made his mind and memories foggy, and the one he had was much intense as he actually WNET through the week in heat and didn't inject himself with suppressants. I just slept in your bed." Izuku confronted. The alpha sat confused. "So what?" he replied back. Katsuki stared at the Omega, and his petite figure, that was now gaining healthy weight. He eyed him, visibly causing Izuku to blush and become self-conscious of the alpha. Was he purposefully eyeing Izuku? "I carried you here," he spoke, ruffling his own hair, once again yawning of exhaustion. Izuku blushed, thinking of how the alpha held him without him knowing. "I'm sorry," Izuku again apologized as the blonde scoffed. "Stop apologizing, he muttered, standing from the bed and walking towards Izuku, who stood, staring at the floor below him. Inching his face to Izuku's ear as he smirked, his breath fanned against the Omega's ear and he smiled, watching his body shiver. He grabbed Izuku's wrists, pulling them towards his chest. "Feel much better when you're in my arms," he spoke, letting Izuku go, watching his blushing face become a mess in no time. He left the Omega there, in his room as he made his way down the stairs. Maybe it was okay to let him in. Maybe it was okay to fall for the Omega. Would it be any harm to the 𝗧𝗲? It couldn't be so bad, so he would allow it just this once. 7. Good morning, Masaru greeted his son as the blonde sat down, his mother plated down, fluffy pancakes down. Katsuki took no syrup to his pancakes as he hated the sickening sweetness. The square-pieced butter that sat on top melted as it dripped from the pancake layers. A whipped cream can sat on the table, freshly out the fridge, blueberries that littered the plate along with freshly picked strawberries that they received from their neighbor daily. "Where's Izuku?" Mitsuki asked, confused. "Left him a blushing mess. Don't make any for him, we'll eat together." Katsuki spoke as the blonde woman smiled as she sat down. She nodded as Masaru stared in confusion of his son's actions. 1 week of ignoring the Omega, he was back to acknowledging the Omega. His son was surely odd. 7 steps on the staircase alerted the adults as Izuku peeked out, walking over as Katsuki pulled Izuku to a seat beside him. "We'll eat together," Katsuki spoke as Izuku only nodded. If this was the only opportunity he would get to have the alpha's attention, he was going to use it well. The two began eating. The sounding of the whipped cream filled the living room, and soon the two were finished, Izuku taking the last bite of the strawberry, loving but hating the sour taste. Katsuki stood from his seat as Izuku looked confused as the alpha stretched before making his way up. Izuku didn't know if to follow or not, so he Saturday. "How are you, Izuku?" Mitsuki asked as Izuku nodded. "Better than yesterday," he admitted before the three of them heard a "follow me" come from the stairs, and with that Izuku took his leaving the Teo parents on the table, taking the plate to the sink and making his way to the alpha's room. Entering the room, he was enveloped in a hug that he wasn't expecting. His eyes widened as he hugged the alpha back, enjoying his masculine scent. "Alpha," Izuku muttered out accidentally. Katsuki backed away, his eyes wide before he smiled. The blonde had never been called alpha to the point 𝗕𝗁𝐾𝐫. Yet again he hated admitting that as soon as he came to terms with it. "We're gonna go out," the alpha spoke. Izuku blushed. He'd love to go out, but what if alphas approach him again? What if people recognize him as he's been on the news as a missing person? He was scared. Katsuki noticed this immediately as he grabbed Izuku's face, holding it in his palms as he looked into his eyes. Intense eye contact was shared. "You're safe with me," the alpha comforted. Izuku only blushed, attempting to look away but was unable to. Izuku felt safe, maybe it was okay. The two males doubted each other, yet they gave each other a chance. There was no other feeling Izuku had ever felt. The feeling of his palms sweating, but feeling the cold October air, it all felt too familiar to him. The wind, the gray sky that was blanketed with clouds, refusing any source of sunlight. The feeling of a warm hand in Izuku's own was all that he felt, staring into the ground that his shoes walked upon. The sound of people talking filled the streets, cars driving, occasional buses. Izuku never cast his eyes upon any of those details, afraid his eyes would meet with a familiar, afraid he'd see looks of disgust casted upon him. He kept his head down. The only comfort was the blonde's hand in his own. He gained a few nudges and pushes that Katsuki growled to before the person apologized. The air filled with millions of scents Izuku didn't like. Some were far too dominating, and some were disgusting. Katsuki noticed it all, the unintentional squeeze the Omega caused as their hands were together. He noticed, he didn't ignore it. They were finally inside a shop, grabbing a basket to put all their things inside. Katsuki stood aside with Izuku, lifting his chin up and meeting his emerald eyes. "You all right?" the alpha asked, gaining a nod from the Omega. He didn't buy it, of course he didn't. "You sure? You were really nervous when we were walking, you didn't look up," Katsuki continued. Izuku only then began blushing. The alpha was paying attention to him the whole time. He wanted to purr at the received attention, but he held it together. "I'm afraid," Izuku spoke simply. The alpha nodded. Despite not knowing entirely, he let it go. "Patience," he thought. "You can buy whatever you want." Izuku looked, seeing the male make his way through the aisles, following him, staring at the shelves that were stacked, and then fridges. He didn't know what anything was, how it tasted. "I don't know anything," he muttered, gaining attention from the alpha, just how he liked it. "Want me to pick something out for you?" Katsuki asked, gaining a nod. "Use your words," he spoke again. "Why yes," Izuku stuttered. They retraced their steps as Katsuki picked a few things out, retracing their steps back to the cold fridge aisle, picking a few more out. The basket looked heavy, but for an alpha like Katsuki, it was nothing. Izuku eyes what the alpha was adding to the basket. It was all things he didn't know, never tried, and he was scared but excited to get his taste buds on something new. "What if I don't like something?" the Omega questioned, following the alpha, making way for a few alphas that held a dominating aura. "I'll finish it," he replied back. To the aisle they walked were quiet. They hadn't had much to talk about, Katsuki asking a few times, "Do you want this?" grabbing his hand to move past alphas that growled. Izuku didn't like the growls they let out. Behind them, he deeply apologized. Until Izuku felt a strong grip meet his shoulder, his heartbeat increasing its beat. "Beat, beat, beat. Beat, beat, beat. You're that Omega on the news, right?" The alpha spoke, an Omega by his side, much smaller than him. Katsuki turned, taking the male's hand off his Omega's shoulder. "Don't grab him like that," Katsuki growled. The two Omegas hid behind their alphas. "Why haven't you reported him?" the alpha asks. "Because he's my mate, pisses off," Katsuki continuously growled. "You haven't marked him?" the alpha asked, questions from left and right. "He's not ready for that," Katsuki answered. "We have places to be, so bye." The alpha opposite frowned before his Omega pulled his arm. "Don't do anything, let them be." The sounding of the scanner was heard. Katsuki inserted his card, it going through, Izuku bagging the things nicely as Katsuki had asked him to. Leaving the shop, being greeted by wind blowing, the two let the wind settle down before the alpha grabbed the Omega's hand once again. The Omega was confused. He asked the alpha about what he had just said, but then he didn't want to sound so hopeful. Desperate. Letting out an exasperated sigh, covering his mouth. He apologized. It was rude to sigh. "Want to talk about something?" Katsuki asked. Izuku shook his head. "No, but I want to go home." Katsuki nodded his head. The two made it home. In silence. Entering. Taking off their shoes. Putting away groceries. "Do you want to try something now?" Katsuki asked. Izuku nodded his head as Katsuki placed options down on the wooden round table. Izuku taking a look at them all. They looked delicious, ranging from vanilla cupcakes, fruit cups, cookies, chocolate with some extra added, macaroons which were just as good as the original, peanut butter cups, Oreos, 𝗵𝗃 and ECT. 13 eyeing the macaroons, Izuku took them, Katsuki smiling before he packed everything else. Making their way upstairs, Katsuki had his own mini fridge, so he packed what he could into it, which he managed to fit in nice and cozily. Sitting back onto the bed, Izuku was familiar with. He tried the macaroons, having the flavors. They were delicious. The sound of the TV filled the silence, Katsuki sitting beside Izuku. Izuku was tempted to ask, staring down onto the duvet that covered his lap. Katsuki, Izuku whispered. The alpha's ears perked up to his name as he hummed, signaling he was listening. Can I ask you something? The Omega asked, putting down a macaroon, looking at the alpha beside him, admiring his features for about the 100th time he did as he had met the alpha. Go on, he accepted. You called me your mate. The passionate moonlight sky was accompanied by unilluminated clouds, the stars concealed behind the thick blanket, the constant smooth shift of the clouds, sliding over the moon, sheltering it before exposing it to the human eye. Even if it was October, the breeze this night was soft against Izuku's freckled skin. His eyes gleaming, the view of the moon shining through his eyes. His hair flowing swiftly to the direction of the wind. Izuku was zoned out, his clothes ruffling and the Omega's shirt pressing against his skin, making it cold. The question that he had asked was answered, not surprisingly getting the answer he didn't want but slightly expected. You called me your mate. The scene replayed like a broken record, over and over and over and over again. It was to get the alpha off our backs. It didn't mean anything. It wasn't something Izuku wanted to hear, but he wasn't expecting any better. It just hurt. For a sudden sound of a door creak took Izuku out of his repetitive daze. Glancing, he saw the ashy blonde, which he frowned at before looking back ahead of him, up into the clouded sky. What are you doing? It was audible that Alpha was tired and had taken a nap as his voice was croaky and deeper than usual, his eyes adjusting to his awake state. Just thinking, the Omega mumbled before having the blonde sits beside him, his legs pulled to his chest. It's about what I said, isn't it? The Alpha confesses. Katsuki assumed it would be better to talk it out just like his therapist had said. The Omega didn't reply, but stared into the night sky. Is it? The Alpha questions once more, Izuku glancing over before nodding and looking away. The Alpha sighed, before smiling, allowing himself to be taken in by the captivating moonlight. 𝗬𝗓𝗄𝗎 the first Omega. That I felt different about, and I'm trying to figure it out, the Alpha confessed, his voice calm. So you mess around, confuse me. Silence followed on intensely. Katsuki glanced over, seeing hurt present in the Omega's eyes, expression, something he didn't like seeing. I don't want to mess around with you, the Alpha admits. The two share eye contact and feel a quick spark that fades as soon as Izuku looks away, blushing. The two acknowledged what they felt and silence fell upon them. Izuku wondered what that was, wanting to take another look, see if it would happen again if eye contact was made, but he was already blushing. Hearing shuffling, the Alpha had seemingly scooted closer. Was he telling the truth? It was so hard for the Omega to tell, but he stayed silent, listening to what else the Alpha has to say. He's never been so close to an Alpha except for when he had to do SXL activities with them. This was the first time he could admire and sit beside an Alpha without being touched, although he was slightly nervous, scenarios playing in his head of it possibly happening, but the more he sat he realized this Alpha had no intention of any of that. I just don't know what I'm feeling. I want to protect you. I don't want you to feel scared. When your pheromones leak, I love your scent. He continuously stared out into the sky, before turning to Izuku and touching his neck when he mentioned pheromones. Izuku's spine tingled, a chill running down it. He shivered, the Alpha chuckling as he took his hand away. If I were to mess around, I would have taken advantage of you when you were in your heat, Katsuki states. Izuku doesn't reply but just glances at the Alpha. Well, he had a point. More silence. Izuku stood up abruptly, catching the Alpha off guard before the Alpha caught the Omega's wrist in his own hand, feeling how petite but soft his skin was. Sit, he demanded in a strong but tiring tone. Izuku sat, shoulders touching with the alpha this time, something his mind was mainly focused on. The wind blew past the two males, filling in the silence that became unbearable with the cold wind making Izuku shiver. So what does this mean? Izuku's words had reached Katsuki, making him think. What did he want? He didn't know himself. But he had to clarify. We need to spend time together, is all the alpha said. Izuku stared into his eyes, wanting to desperately feel that spark, which he did. Red eyes met green, sparking and electrifying. Feeling that made them both keep their contact, before one looked away, it of course being Izuku. 3. Spend time together. Izuku repeated, unsure of what the alpha meant. Katsuki sighed before smiling, allowing his head to fall back. Catching the Omega's wrist in his own palm, he took Izuku up into his room. Yes, like today, Katsuki gave as an example. The two were greeted with warmth, making Izuku's fingers burn from how long he'd been freezing out in the cold. The sound of the clock ticking that filled the silence. The two sat on the bed, Katsuki rummaging through his wardrobe before equipping him with some of his clothes, smiling, making fierce eye contact with the Omega. This is only the start. Tuesday, October 12, 20XX, a week and a half has passed. The progress between Bakugo and Izuku have been visible even to the parents' eyes. They stared from time in confusion of their son's actions, wondering if it was really their son. However, they knew it was his loud booming voice that sounded, his overpowering pheromones and his intimidating glare that Izuku had managed to get sort of comfortable with. Mitsuki had often came back from work finding the pair in each other's arms on the couch, the TV always playing an advert. She chuckled to herself before covering the two to keep them warm during the October month, and left them instead of waking them up. To her it looked like Katsuki had grown more attached and warmed up to the Omega, and it was great progress. Katsuki argued as the usual, but when he was so distracted and Mitsuki asked for something he wouldn't hesitate to pass it or give a helping hand. Something about Izuku's presence as an Omega changed Katsuki. He may have not realized, but everyone else had. But this wouldn't last forever, not without climbing a large obstacle. 3. Mitsuki made it into work this morning, it being 10:30, on her exact time as always, being punctual as she always was. A female called out to her. "Mitsuki, you're here," she exclaimed, catching up to Mitsuki, who put her things down and sat at her desk. She glanced and nodded her head. "What's the matter?" she asked, confused at her employee who was panting out of breath. "These men came in and gave us this," she spoke out, handing Mitsuki paper which the blonde woman took and read. "Wanted, Izuku Midoriya. An Omega that had run away from its owners. We are looking and soon will be knocking and searching every house to find the Omega that belongs to us. We miss him dearly, we hope to find him soon, and if you had spotted him anywhere please contact 81XXXXXXXX." Mitsuki read every word, blinking, making sure it was the right thing, looking at the picture as if it were a prison photo. It was Izuku. "Okay, what am I supposed to do with this?" "We're a company, not local authorities," Mitsuki spoke. She was quite good in hiding things. She was an alpha, never suspected. "I'm not sure, I thought you'd like to know," the woman spoke. Mitsuki placed the paper on her desk. "If that's all, thank you, you may get back to work." The woman bowed to Mitsuki before leaving the blonde's office. Mitsuki glanced at the paper back again before sighing. Izuku and her son had bonded deeply, and she highly doubted her son would now let him go. But if it were the case where she had to go Izuku back, she wasn't going to let him go easily, not without a fight. If going to court had to be the case, she would happily do so. All she cared for was her son to be happy, and she wasn't going to let anyone take that away from him. She made a call to her husband, updating him on the matter. 5. Meanwhile, back at home. The Omega's laughter filled the air, the sound of clothes ruffling against the bedsheets. The Alpha was currently on top of his Omega, digging his fingers into his sides, not so aggressively. Katsuki had grown on Izuku, not being able to leave his Omega's side, knowing when he felt down. Even if they had a few moments where they were fuming at each other, Katsuki always made sure they communicated, always approaching the Omega first. He no longer wanted to call Izuku the Omega, he wanted a different title. Calling his Omega the Omega was slightly disrespectful. It was as if he didn't see his Omega as human. "My pet," he mumbled, causing Izuku to stop his giggling and his face to fall red. Izuku asked in question, causing Katsuki to look in question. He did not just say that out loud, he thought. He cleared his throat. I want to give you a nickname, and 𝗵𝗃 came to mind. He looked away. Izuku sat up from his laying down position, positioning himself on his elbows. I guess I don't mind. Izuku mumbled, breaking eye contact. The alpha's ears perked up as he stared in surprise. What, really? I can call you my pet? He asked as Izuku nodded, causing the alpha to pounce onto him, pinning his arms to the sides of his head. 5. My pet, I like it. Katsuki spoke as if he were a dog with a tail wagging. His face revealed satisfaction in the suggestion, which made Izuku blush and nod in agreement. Seeing the alpha smile and finally find some sort of comfort made Izuku feel warm in the stomach, making it flutter. When's your heat? Katsuki questioned. He didn't note down the date Izuku was on it. He didn't know they'd be this far into their relationship. They weren't just together yet, but things were going great. 1. I'm not sure, but my scent should get sweeter, Izuku mumbled. Upset he didn't know any information on Omegas or himself in general, Katsuki only nodded. Don't sweat it, I guess, the blonde mumbled before getting off. The two spent their time in bed. Izuku was sleeping much better, and they were expecting another visit from Mitsuki's doctor soon, 𝗕𝗫𝗍𝗍. Izuku was nervous for that time. But he was promised to have Katsuki beside him, so he felt stronger having the alpha around. Sleep, pet, Katsuki spoke, realizing the yawn that escaped Izuku, which caused Izuku to chuckle as the blonde squeezed his nose. Cute, Katsuki thought. Plus he didn't regret giving the Omega another chance.